So before I jump into this video, I should probably apologise for my absence over the last 10 days or so. I managed to break my shoulder, which pretty much took me out of action. By the time you dose up on painkillers and find yourself sleeping in an armchair, it does make it hard to function and do anything really. But I'm gradually on the mend, and I have found now that it's actually far more comfortable to sit at my desk. So you guys may find that I'm doing more frequent videos from this point in. So with that said, let's jump in and have a look at today's video. Now, if you follow my channel, you know that some of my favourite channels of people who've moved to Australia are Brits who have moved to Australia. My favourite, of course, being Cody and Joe and their little Chihuahua Pom Cross Pico. If you've seen my videos, you'll know who I'm talking about. I've covered them a few times, and they're still putting out brilliant content, and I'm sure I'll be doing more about them again in the future. And I was actually kind of chuffed because they gave me a little shout out on one of their recent videos, which was pretty cool. So, you know, I love Brits in Australia. But I have to say, I'm just going to warn you now, these people rubbed me up the wrong way. And I really felt the need to comment on their video. So if you are not a fan of my videos where I give people a roasting, I will pre-warn you now, you probably want to come back and watch a different video at another time. But if you are open to me roasting people who are quite negative about Australia, then stick around. Let's jump in and see what these people had to say about the 10 things that they miss in Australia, the 10 UK things that they miss in Australia.
Hello everybody. Living in Australia is amazing, but there are some things in the UK we can't help but miss.
One of them is so small you'd never expect it. Here are 10.5 things we really wish we could move down under. What we mean by half? Well, we'll share that later.
So, look, I've got no objection to scripted videos, but I do have an issue with the way they did this, and I will discuss it a bit more. But I feel that straight up, they don't sound very genuine in what they are saying. Because it is scripted, it lacks the spontaneity and it lacks a bit of sincerity. The other thing I'm not a fan of is someone in front of the camera with sunglasses on inside. I would like to be able to actually read in their face what they're talking about. And I know you may say that sounds rich coming from someone who's not on camera themselves, but I think if you are going to put yourself on camera, then unless you are making it as a deliberate move, there's a video that I watched where there's a guy who wears a scarf over his nose and mouth and sunnies and then a hat, and that's his gimmick for his video, then that's fine. But if you're just putting yourself out there, I prefer to be able to see people's faces and see their eyes and see what it is that they are genuinely saying. Sure, if you're outside doing a video, wear sunnies, it's bright outside. But I'm not sure why you would wear sunnies inside. Okay, let's just get on with this video.
Naan bread in my hand, I'm feeling fine.
If there's one food we desperately miss from the UK, it's British Indian restaurant food, also known as BIR. It's famous all over the world, but honestly, you just can't get it the same in Australia. It's creamy, luscious, sweet, fragranty, coconutty, full of almonds and spices. It's just unctuous heaven on a plate. Now don't get us wrong, Indian food in Australia is good, but it's just not the same as British Indian restaurant food.
So straight away I have an issue with this, and that being that I've seen so many travel channels where people have basically said that Australian Indian food is the best Indian food outside of India. And that is because we have a large Asian influence here on our culture. We have so many Indian migrants, and we have Indian restaurants who make traditional Indian foods. I could name probably half a dozen brilliant Indian restaurants around Bendigo where you are just going to get the most sublime Indian food. It's my understanding that British Indian food is a fusion kind of food, so it's not real Indian food. Some of it is, but you can get mulligatawny soup at some British Indian restaurants. Like, hello, that's not British. I mean, that's not Indian. I think they're being a little bit too nitpicky here, and I think perhaps if they were to be a little bit more adventurous and try a few more restaurants, they might actually find some truly brilliant Indian restaurants here in Australia.
Even my brother in Germany agrees, it's just not the same there either. And the thing is, British Indian restaurant food is its own thing. It actually developed in the UK mainly thanks to Bangladeshi chefs who adapted Indian, Pakistani and Bangladeshi dishes to suit British tastes. That's how some of the most famous dishes came about, like chicken tikka masala wasn't actually invented in India. Legend has it that a chef in Glasgow first made it in the 1970s by adding a creamy tomato sauce to chicken tikka because a customer wanted it less dry. Whether that exact story is true or not, one thing's for sure, chicken tikka masala is a British invention and it became one of the UK's favourite dishes.
So you have a British restaurant claiming somewhere that it invented chicken tikka masala and that it is now like a whole worldwide phenomenon that was actually invented in Britain. Well, I looked at a few sources online, and there were a few sources that cited this whole story of it being invented in Britain. But I found this article, which is actually from an Indian cuisine site, which discusses chicken tikka masala. The national dish of India is chicken tikka masala. It came from several hypotheses that exist. It is regarded as a historically significant dish from the subcontinent. It is thought to have originated in India thousands of years ago. And it is prepared in an oven called a tandoor. Large chunks of flesh were cooked when making chicken tikka masala in the past. The Empire of Mongolia gave it a try. According to legend, Babur was afraid he might choke on some bones. He instructed his chef to prepare chicken without bones and chop it into bite-sized pieces. It is said to be the subcontinent's original source of chicken tikka masala. So, a little bit arrogant trying to claim that your country invented an Indian dish that's been around for thousands of years, basically. We have tikka masala here in Australia at regular Indian restaurants, basically with traditional Indian food. Why are they going to use something from the UK? Okay, moving on.
And it's not just that. British Indian food has its own unique style. The way curries are cooked in restaurants, the way they use a special base sauce, it's different from traditional Indian home cooking. So one of the first things we do when we go back to the UK is go straight to a local Indian restaurant. Nothing beats it.
Now, obviously, I've never had Indian food in the UK, but from all I've heard, it is fake Indian food. And honestly, I think these people just need to be a little bit more adventurous. Maybe if one Indian restaurant isn't so great, shop around, because I can assure you there are some utterly brilliant Indian restaurants here in Australia that make good quality traditional Indian food, including tikka masala.
Pack your bags, no need to plan. Follow the road.
Another thing we really miss about the UK is how easy it was just to hop in the car and go somewhere different for the weekend. You could leave work on a Friday, drive an hour and be somewhere completely different. Maybe a little village with a cosy B&B, a seaside town, or in the countryside with a nice pub and a roaring fire. But in Australia, once you leave the cities, it's a bit different. The distances are huge and there aren't always places to stop like in the UK. You can drive for hours and not come across a town big enough to have a hotel, let alone a cute B&B. And if you really want to go somewhere completely different for the weekend, flying would be a better option.
Now, these people apparently live in Sydney, and they're saying that there's nowhere they can go for a weekend getaway from Sydney. There's so many places you can go. Go to the Blue Mountains, head to the coast, go to Bateman's Bay. I know my dad lived in the Blue Mountains and he used to every summer go to Bateman's Bay for a few weeks. I mean, what a joke. Of all places to claim that you can't really go for decent road trips, Sydney would not be one of them that I would consider. Even here in central Victoria, I can drive an hour up the road and go for a paddle steamer ride in Echuca. Or I can go half an hour, 40 minutes drive, go to beautiful historic Castlemaine. If I want to go for a few hours, I can go down to Melbourne and enjoy all the offerings that a big city offer. And that's only a small fraction of the things that I could do on a weekend road trip here in central Victoria, which is far more isolated than I would consider Sydney to be.
As driving just doesn't get you far enough, fast enough. Australia has some incredible places and getting to them is a mission. You have to be well planned in advance, so it's not as simple as just hopping in the car for a quick weekend away.
Okay, I'm just going to do a quick shameless plug for Eat Venture Vlogs, which is who I was talking about before, because one of the things they do really well on their channel is they go for little day trips. They go all sorts of places around. I think they're on the Sunshine Coast, are they? Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast. But they go for so many fantastic little weekends away or day trips. So many adventures. They don't have any trouble with it. So these people they need to actually look beyond the end of their nose, I think.
So yes, we love road trips in Australia, but sometimes we do miss those easy weekend getaways in the UK.
I have to admit, I miss London. I used to live just an hour south in Kent and I'd visit the city all the time, and honestly, I would just never get bored with it. There's something magical about the Thames and taking a boat trip, watching the city unfold from the water, seeing landmarks like the London Eye, the Tower of London and Westminster. The parks are green oases in the midst of the city. Shopping in London is unmatched, from high street stores to luxury shopping in Harrods, or wandering through Covent Garden or Carnaby Street. The theatre scene, nothing beats a night in the West End. The fact you can walk into world-class places like the British Museum and the National Gallery completely for free is incredible. The Tube is a London institution and makes getting around so easy, but it's great to see the Metro in Sydney now though. London is a mix of history and modernity, old landmarks standing alongside places like the Gherkin and the Shard. Living in Australia is amazing, but there will always be a part of me that misses London. If you've ever lived there or even just visited, you'll know exactly what I mean.
And this is where it starts to become really, really apparent that whatever Australia has to offer, it's not good enough because it's not the UK. That's essentially what they're saying here. He talks about, oh, well, you can go for a boat trip on the Thames. Well, okay, you live in Sydney, how about a trip on the Manly Ferry? That's pretty nice. Landmarks, you can see landmarks from the Manly Ferry too. Sydney Harbour Bridge, Sydney Opera House. Beautiful scenery all around. And then, oh, London has parks, this green oasis. Well, doesn't Sydney have that too? And you can head down to the shore, the waterfront, and go for these beautiful walks. You wouldn't even know you were in the city area. Shopping, well, Queen Victoria Building, I can remember going there as a teenager and it was just mind-blowing. Sydney has some pretty impressive shopping. Maybe we don't have all the famous stores, but there's still plenty of shopping options in Sydney. Yes, the UK is well known for the West End and its theatre scene, but have you been to the theatre lately in Australia? Sydney and Melbourne, the quality of the shows that you can go to, I would say, and I've heard this from my sister who has been to shows in London, shows in America, she's been to Broadway, she's been to the West End, she's been to countless shows in Australia, and I would have to say that the quality of theatre productions here in Australia is on par with West End. The only difference is the name, because obviously in Sydney or Melbourne there's so many different theatres, so you can go to the Regent Theatre down here in Melbourne or the Princess Theatre down in Melbourne. Doesn't mean that the quality of the show is any less. And perhaps had they gone to some shows in Australia, they might actually know that. British Museum, National Gallery, we've got some pretty spectacular museums and galleries here in Australia too. I don't know, maybe they're not on par with the British Museum and the National Gallery, but I don't know, if you've been to the British Museum and the National Gallery, how many times do you need to visit them anyway? Talks about the Tube. I've heard that the Sydney trains aren't so great at the moment, but transport-wise, I mean, most cities in Australia, from what I've heard, tend to do a little bit better than the whole of UK in general. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it really does sound like what he's saying here is he'd just rather be in London than in Sydney, and nothing that Sydney has to offer could possibly compare with London, and he's not even going to consider it.
Something else we really miss about living in the UK is how easy it was to hop on a plane or a train and be in another country in just a few hours. You could wake up in London, jump on the Eurostar and be in Paris for lunch, or take a short flight and be in Spain, Italy or Greece before dinner. It was that easy. We absolutely loved visiting France. One of our favourite trips was to Annecy. This beautiful town is situated by a lake with mountains all around, like a picture postcard come to life. We also visited Lewis's brother a few times in beautiful Munich. We found flying reasonably priced, so it felt like travel was always within reach. But in Australia, flying is different. The distances are huge. When we fly home from Sydney, after 7 hours from takeoff, we're still in Australia. Airfares are generally much higher too. There aren't as many budget airline options. So yes, we love Australia, but we do miss the days when we could just grab our passports, book a cheap flight, and be exploring a whole new country.
Well, here's a novel concept. If you've had so many trips to France and Munich, how about exploring the Southern Hemisphere? Go check out New Zealand. You can spend a month in New Zealand and still not see anything. You can fly to different areas in Australia and see amazing places, different things. And there's all of Asia, not that far away. You've got the Pacific Islands. Do I need to go on? If you are so missing a quick hop across the channel to France, maybe Australia's not the place for you. If your idea of travel is going to old familiar places, then yeah, you're not going to achieve that in Australia. So go back to the UK and then you can have your trip across the channel, go visit France, go to Munich, go to Spain. It really feels like these people are just being really nitpicky about the options in Australia.
Australia is always producing some amazing artists and music like the Easy Beats, AC/DC, INXS, Powderfinger, Jet, Kylie, Kid Laroi, Tame Impala, Tones and I, Vance Joy. But there's something we really miss from the UK. In the UK, music isn't just something you listen to, it's part of the culture. Movements like Britpop, punk and New Romantics weren't just about music, they shaped fashion, attitudes and whole generations. Everyone knew the latest bands, who was number one in the charts. It was just part of everyday life. But in Australia, music just isn't as big a deal. There are great artists for sure, but there isn't that same general interest. It doesn't feel like a movement the way it does in the UK. Back home, pop culture and music are completely intertwined.
Well, maybe by the time you are in your 70s, then you don't actually pay attention to the music culture that exists in Australia. But to turn around and say that Australia doesn't have a music culture, look at the number of festivals that are on in every state year round. I noticed there was a festival in Tasmania over the weekend that was attended by something like 13,000 people, which for Tassie is pretty huge. You have all these festivals in Victoria. My brother is a musician and he travels all around Victoria, all up the New South Wales coast, up to Byron Bay, up to Queensland for festivals. Like, to say that Australia does not have that kind of music culture, it has a different music culture probably to the UK, because we don't all go around wearing tops with Union Jacks on them, if that's what you're talking about. But there is definitely a strong music culture here in Australia. My golly gosh, I grew up in a household with a mother who listened to ABC radio, meaning that I didn't get to listen very often to the popular radio stations. And that meant that at school I was a bit of an outsider, because I really had to work to know what the popular songs were. And at school you were expected, you know, you were a bit of a reject if you didn't know what the popular songs were. Sure, I eventually got a Walkman and was able to catch up with music culture, but, you know, in grade 7 I can remember I was a bit of a reject because my mother didn't listen to commercial radio, so I didn't know a lot of the songs that were out there. I think a lot of the stuff that I knew early on was because I had a sister who was 3 years older than me and had better access to that sort of stuff. So to turn around and say that there isn't any kind of music culture in here in Australia is a joke. I think it is a different culture, and I think it's a really ridiculous argument coming from people who don't look like they would partake in that kind of culture. Maybe they did in the 60s or the 70s, but they certainly wouldn't be partaking of it now. So how they can say that they're missing it? Are they planning on going to a rage next time they go to the UK? Okay, moving on.
You don't realise how good the UK supermarkets are until you move to Australia. In the UK, you've got Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Morrisons, Waitrose, Aldi, Lidl, Iceland, Co-op, and of course, Marks and Spencer's Food Hall, which was always a treat as it was top quality. We were spoilt for choice, especially when it came to ready-made meals. Fresh, frozen, vegan, gluten-free, whatever you want. But in Australia, supermarkets have no shopping appeal. It's get in, buy your groceries and get out. There isn't a demand for ready-made meals, as the Aussie way of dining is totally different.
Now, I know nothing about those brands of supermarkets that she spoke about, so I couldn't comment as to how that compares with what we have here. But as for there's no demand for ready-made meals here in Australia, have these people even looked in the deli section or the freezer section at their local supermarket? My gosh, right now, with a broken shoulder, I can't really cook. So my diet is ready-made meals. And plenty of options. I can get the frozen ones or I can get the deli ones. And that's from Woolies, IGA, Aldi, you name it, it's available. And certainly if you start looking at places like the IGA ready-made meals that are in the deli section and the Woolies ready-made meals in the deli section, yeah, they're a little pricey, but they're damn good quality. So that's a bit of a pathetic argument. Yeah, I've heard that our groceries are more expensive here. That said, that's why you shop at Aldi. But, you know, if you're looking for specific things, then yes, Aldi and IGA might be a little bit limited, and you might need to go to Coles and Woolies for those things that you're after, such as ready-made meals.
And another thing we miss being able to buy is beer and wine in the same shop. In the UK, you just grab a bottle of wine with your groceries. In Australia, you have to go to a separate bottle shop.
Okay, I'm confused because I thought that Aldi in New South Wales was the same as Victoria in that you can actually buy alcohol in Aldi. As for it being such an imposition to go to a separate bottle shop, you go through the checkout, you come out the door of the supermarket and the bottle shop is right there in front of you. So it just seems like a bit of a weak argument to have to say that you have to go to a separate bottle shop. It's basically you're just going down a different aisle essentially and paying at a different checkout, because it's not like you have to get in the car and go somewhere else. And most bottle shops, because they are attached to the supermarket, aren't going to object to you walking in there with your trolley, parking your trolley at the counter while you grab what it is that you need, and then paying and heading out. Correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it's just very different in New South Wales.
We mainly shop at farmers' markets and small food outlets as the food is organic and fresh. We buy only our essentials from the Aussie Australian independent grocers, IGA, and sometimes at Aldi. We rarely shop at the two main supermarkets, which are called Coles and Woolworths. The fresh food here is amazing, so we do love that side of it. So one of the things we always do when we visit the UK is we go to the nearest large supermarket chain. It is a nostalgic trip, wandering the aisles, picking up all the things we miss. And the funny side is, we get so carried away, we forget to convert the pound to the dollar. Oh, I do miss my Marks and Spencers.
I actually think that the supermarkets we have here are well and truly big enough. I wouldn't want to be going to a supermarket where I spent all day wandering around trying to get what I needed. And, you know, if you miss your Marks and Spencers so much, go back to the UK, live in the UK, you can go to Marks and Spencers every damn day if you like.
Christmas in Australia is always special, beaches, Barbies and sunshine. But if you grew up in the UK, you can't help but miss a cold Christmas. There's something unique about a winter Christmas, wrapping up in scarves and gloves, the crisp air and that cosy feeling of walking into a warm cheers with a roaring fire. But one of the biggest things we miss isn't just the weather, it's the timing of the holidays. In Australia, Christmas and the summer holiday happen at the same time. But in the UK, summer was 6 months before Christmas, so you always had another big break to look forward to. In Australia, once Easter is over, it's a long, long wait until Christmas. There's no big holiday break in between. Back in the UK, summer and Christmas were nicely spread out, but here it can feel like you're missing a holiday somehow. Don't get us wrong, Christmas in the sun definitely has its perks, but there's just something about a cosy cold Christmas, warm jumpers, mulled wine and watching the snow fall outside while you're tucked up inside.
Okay, this truly does sound like they are basically highlighting every aspect of Australian culture just to say that it's not as good as the UK. Personally, I don't find the thought of a winter Christmas overly appealing. I love being able to just sit outdoors, have the nice big spread, have your chairs spread out, under cover of course, because usually Christmas days are usually pretty hot, but just being able to sit outside and enjoy the sunshine and just that relaxed feel of an Australian Christmas in the warmth. I mean, how often do they actually have white Christmases in the UK? Is it every year? I mean, it sounds like they're being a little bit nostalgic here as well. But honestly, we know that British houses are tiny. So basically what he's saying is that he would prefer to be cramped up in a teeny tiny British house, unable to go outside because it's freezing cold, rather than sitting outside enjoying the sunshine in Australia and relaxing. I know which I'd prefer. Mulled wine, well, you can still have your mulled wine in Australia if that's what you really like. It's just that most people don't like warm alcohol here in Australia. Yeah, to me it just really feels like they're just really, really nitpicking here. And it honestly feels like they're just not happy with being in Australia.
One of the biggest things we miss about living in the UK, without a doubt, is family and friends. It's inevitable that when you move to the other side of the world, you'll lose touch with some people. But we've stayed close to our family and good friends. But as great as video calls are, they're just not the same as seeing people face to face or getting a hug or a boozy. We've been so lucky to have friends and family visit us, which has been amazing. When we first came to Australia, we'd be travelling back to the UK every 2 to 3 years, but that wasn't sustainable, so the visits got less frequent. We twice met up with a good friend in different continents, once in Asia and the other in the USA. That was such fun and a great way to combine a reunion with a holiday. The last time I saw my brother and my dad was 5 years ago. I flew home and came back with them as they couldn't travel by themselves. We had the best 10 weeks in Australia, and that memory will stay with me. So much has changed in the past 5 years. Their health isn't so good, so they wouldn't manage a long haul flight now. The worst thing is when someone back home gets sick, or when they pass away and you're thousands of miles away. That's when it really hits hard.
Okay, I will give them that one. I have friends who are from the UK, and yes, they do miss their family. Of course, these are friends who have young children and are missing having their parents there to enjoy their children growing up. But, you know, their parents come over for a visit, but it's not the same thing. That said, it does sound like these people have quite a bit of money to throw around if they were heading back to the UK every other year, and now they're just doing it as holidays to Europe or America or something instead to catch up with family. I guess you've got to factor that in if you're going to move to the other side of the world as to how much you are going to cope with being away from family. And I think, I don't know how I'd go being away from some of my family, but that said, I mean, I've moved states and I've not been back to Tassie in over 6 years, close to 7 years now, and I haven't seen any of my Tassie family in that time. And yeah, you miss them, so I can appreciate that. So I'm not going to be too critical of them here, but I do think that if it is such a issue for you and you haven't built a new life for yourself with new friendships and new relationships, then maybe it is best to move back to your home country so you can be around family rather than be isolated, if that's what they are feeling.
One thing we didn't expect when moving to Australia was how much we miss UK TV. In the UK, you've got the BBC and ITV producing loads of quality shows, gripping dramas, brilliant comedies, and those big budget nature documentaries. But here in Australia, it's a lot of reality TV, and they show it every night for weeks. And we're not joking, some of these shows are on 5 nights a week for 10 weeks straight. We actually stopped watching free-to-air TV in Australia about 5 years ago. Now we just stick to Netflix, YouTube and sometimes BritBox, because in summer they just play repeats, since they know no one's watching. So yes, we miss UK TV for sure, but at least we've got BritBox and YouTube to keep us going.
I can't help wondering though if free-to-air TV in Britain has gone the same way as it has in Australia, because I never bother turning the TV on unless I'm watching a DVD. Most of what I watch is on my iPad, but that said, in terms of British television, someone needs to tell these people about ABC iView and SBS On Demand, because both of those have quite a lot of British television on there that you can choose from. And yeah, a lot of British television shows do end up on YouTube as well. I can appreciate though, Australian television is crap at the moment, and not only that, but some of the television productions, like not just the crappy reality stuff, but some of the drama stuff that's come out lately has been just appalling. I saw I can't remember which channel it was that's got it on their app, but one of the channels had this show that was based in Tasmania, and it was the most appalling piece of crap I've ever seen. Poorly directed, uses really bad stereotypes, made Tasmanians look like a joke, and was utterly appalling. I think I watched 2 episodes and it wasn't getting any better, and I didn't watch any more of that. And the remake of Picnic at Hanging Rock, I thought that was pretty appalling too. It seems like the golden age of Australian television is gone. I may be wrong, maybe there's some good stuff out there that I just haven't seen, but certainly Australia is definitely lacking when it comes to quality television right now. So I can't criticise them there, but I think that if they were a little bit more adventurous, and if they were to check out ABC iView and SBS On Demand, they may be able to find a lot of really good quality British television that they can still watch for free.
The thing I really miss about the UK is the mountains and my beloved hill walking. I used to hill walk in the Scottish Highlands in a group of avid hill walkers. The sense of achievement once we'd reached the summit was something else, and I'd lose myself taking in the views below and beyond. We'd be out from morning to dusk every second weekend. The longer the day, the longer the trek. When I met Lewis, we were both living in Durham. I introduced him to fell walking, and whenever we could, we set off to the Lake District. By the time we got our visa for Australia, we'd climbed all the popular hilltops and all the Munros in the Lake District. We loved it so much we were married close to Windermere, and every trip home would include a stay in Grasmere and a hike up Helm Crag, first fell that we did together. I am lucky as I equally love the beach to the hills, so I got one of them. It's being with Mother Nature, unspoilt, natural. The landscape here is beautiful, and there are hill ranges, but it's mainly a flat country. Sure, there are some high peaks in the Snowy Mountains and Tasmania, which are great for walking, but it's just not the same. There's nothing that beats the feeling of standing on top of a peak and looking out over the land that has been there from the start of time. Until then, we'll keep exploring Australia's coastlines and appreciate what we have.
Again, clearly these people have never been up the Blue Mountains. And as for saying that Australia is pretty flat, they're saying that there's a few hills in Tasmania. I think a lot of the bushwalks and a lot of the peaks that you can climb in Tasmania would defeat them. Even some of the most hardcore bushwalkers struggle with some of the walks in Tasmania. And yes, there are places in Tasmania when you reach a summit and you can see it looks like forever. So I think they're probably just not doing enough research, really. And I think if they were really that much into their fell walking, which I've never heard of it called that before, but anyway, if they were so much into that, I'm sure they could actually find places to go.
The half a thing I miss about the UK? Well, before moving to Australia, I was so worried I wouldn't find satisfying work here. In the UK, I worked for Black & Decker DeWalt as a design engineer. My proudest achievement was coming up with the combined hammer and clutch mechanism that's now used in DeWalt cordless drills. But when I was researching engineering jobs in Australia, it all seemed to be heavy industry, mining, agriculture, steel making, and I thought, where's all the creative product design work? But I needn't have worried. Since moving here, I've worked for some amazing companies like ResMed, Nanosonics and Breville, doing really creative work in some incredible teams and with extremely talented people. There is so much depth of talent in Australia. I've worked for inspiring CEOs and managers and with incredible engineers, designers and scientists. And from what I've seen, Australia really is the clever country.
I actually don't know what his point was here because he's kind of contradicted himself. He started saying that the work opportunities here weren't good enough, but then he's turned around and basically named a bunch of companies and pointed out how incredibly innovative and creative Australia is. So I'm not quite sure how that factors into this video at all. Okay, so it was a slightly longer video than usual, but theirs was a kind of longish one too, and I had a lot to say. I know I've probably come across as being a little harsh on these guys, but my overall impression of their video was that they were being quite negative about Australia and essentially trying to say that no matter what, Australia just isn't the UK, so therefore it's not good enough. Maybe I've interpreted it wrong, but that's the way I took it. I did find it really distracting that he was reading his comments and not looking at the camera. I did find that kind of distracting and off-putting. Would I watch more of this channel? Possibly not. I'll leave the link for their video down below if you wanted to go and watch it without my interruptions. Go over and check it out if you like. Give them a like, leave them a comment if you feel the need. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening. If you're new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button. YouTube loves it when you do that. And of course, with me having taken almost 2 weeks off, I need all the help I can to get these videos back out there into the algorithm. YouTube doesn't really like it when you take time off. And you can also help by leaving a comment down below. So thanks, and I'll catch you in the next one.